Conversations with Niki is brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets. Well, welcome yet again to another interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. My name's Niki Seberini and this is Conversations with Niki. And every week we bring interesting stories and ideas and concepts to you. And a reminder that if for any reason during the interview you have to pop out or go somewhere, we do podcast each show. So the links of those podcasts are on a website, www.conversationswithniki.co.za. And Niki is spelled N-I-K-I. I'd love to hear from you as well. Perhaps you've got some interesting stories that you'd like to share with me and with the listeners. And if you do, you can always email me, Niki@nikiseberini.com. Well, today is another interesting conversation. You know, we look at the world economy at the moment. I mean, 2008, we had this terrible crash. We still seem to be trying to crawl out of this position that we're in. We've heard recently that the World Bank has cut the 2013 global economic growth outlook. So the global economy is not looking very good. We look at employment opportunities in South Africa. I mean, South Africa has reached the 4.6 million mark. So unemployment in this country is rife. The youth unemployment, there's a huge challenge. So all of these compounding factors. And then in the show today, I'm going to be talking to people who have decided to stop and pause and look for their passion in life. Now, Forbes' most powerful celebrity for 2013, media mogul and philanthropist Oprah Winfrey, who we all love and adore, said, "There is no greater gift you can give or receive than to honor your calling. It's why you were born and how you become the most truly alive." Now that's all good and well if we're living in a world where the economy is thriving, where there's employment, where you don't have to struggle and compete for a job, where you're not having sleepless nights wondering about putting food on the table. Then in that world, if you don't have to worry about it, then finding your calling and finding your dream is that much easier. Well, that's the question we're really going to be asking today. Is it or isn't it? What do we lose along the way when we're just trying to get through day to day, just paying the expenses and not truly living our dreams and our passions? What do we get when we do live our dreams and our passions? And if we do, does that mean we are going to be financially secure? And is it that easy to answer those questions? So I have two very interesting people. The first person that I'm going to be talking to, in fact, I spoke to him a few weeks ago. His name is Austin Vickers. He's an executive leadership training expert, a writer, a producer. He was here in South Africa promoting a movie called The People versus the State of Illusion. And it's all around perception and reality. And I had a long, in-depth discussion with Austin Vickers. You're going to be listening to that in a moment. And then I'm going to be chatting to Philippa Levitt, an integrative coach, who not only helps people look at their shadows, overcome the shadows, find their passions and go for it, but she herself has had to question her career, her choice, and she herself has made those choices. So there's going to be inspiration, there's going to be questioning, but we're also going to leave you with some ideas and concepts to perhaps help you think for a moment, what is your passion? What is your calling? And what can you do to take the steps to get a lot closer without risking it all? Going to be challenging. So stay tuned. That's all coming up in a moment. Conversations with Niki, of course, is sponsored by Study Apps. And statistics have showed that if students do not review what they've learned, they will forget 70% within an hour and 84% within 48 hours. Frightening statistics. So the key to effective long-term learning is testing. Do you need more proof that Study Apps is the market leader in revision and test preparation? Study smarter, not harder, with studyapps.co.za. And I'd like to welcome you to Conversations with Niki. In the studio, I have leadership trainer, public speaker, author, and also writer and producer of People versus the State of Illusion. I have Austin Vickers in the studio. Good afternoon, Austin, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, Niki. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure.
So you've been in South Africa for a short while, and you're here really just to promote this fantastic new movie of yours. But before we get to the movie, Austin, I want to find out a little bit more about you, because, I mean, you're a lawyer, and you graduated with honors, and now you've become this leader, you've become the speaker, and I've got to know what happened along the way. Was it one particular thing that happened along the way? How do you go from lawyer to thinking completely out of the box?
You know, I was fortunate or unfortunate to grow up with parents who were leaders and pioneers in the alternative medicine field. So depending on your perspective, at least for me, my mother was a writer and speaker about herbs and natural remedies, and my father opened one of the very first holistic therapy centers up in Canada, which is where I'm from, in the early 1970s. So they were crazy, wacky parents, and very liberal, and exposed me to all kinds of crazy ideas, and I think my childhood form of rebellion was becoming a lawyer.
That was your rebellion.
Yes. All my friends were, smoking pot and having sex and doing things they probably shouldn't have been doing, and I became a lawyer, so that was my way of rebelling.
So Austin, I've got to go back to this introduction. So your parents were hippies, really.
Yes,
they were New Age before it became
popular.
Fashionable to be New Age.
That's exactly right.
And it was hard for you?
Yeah, it was very difficult. I mean, I joke about it sometimes when I'm speaking because, I mean, people nowadays think, oh, that's very cool and interesting. But of course, when you're that kid who's going to high school and trying to fit in, and, my mother would send me to school with her homemade herbal deodorant or, or try things out on me all the time. It was very difficult to kind of fit in. And so I gravitated, of course, to a more traditional profession of that, becoming a lawyer, which really irritated them. I mean, not so much, but and then, the whole time I was a lawyer, they continued to give me books to read and things that would really challenge my mind. And I think I just always had a base in that kind of esoteric philosophy and consciousness theories. And I started getting interested in physics, meanwhile I was still practicing as a lawyer. So I never really kind of left it, to be honest.
Did you feel that when you were practicing as a lawyer that you were somebody trying to be someone else?
A little bit, but I mean, I was very enthusiastic about the law when I first started. I had a lot of noble intentions with being a lawyer. I still wanted to change the world, and there are, of course, great examples of lawyers like Gandhi and others that, have practiced law and been successful in doing that. But I started to make compromises. I did very well in law school. I came out. I was offered a very high-paying salary, and I had a lot of law school debt at the time. So rather than doing public interest law, which doesn't pay very much, I accepted those jobs and started to work my way up. And they kind of, they build a gilded golden cage somewhat. And before long, you get paid so much money, and you're being asked to do things that are kind of contrary to, at least they were contrary to my fundamental values. And that created a lot of, I would say internal pain that ultimately I had to deal with. And in the dealing of that, I came back to who I really was at my core, I think.
How would you describe the internal pain?
Well, just, when you're...
Was it waking up and not being comfortable with doing what you were doing? Was it...
Yeah, or
dread?
Just,
was it? What was it?
We're being asked to do things that really, within the first month of working for a company, a Fortune 500 company, I was asked to do things that arguably weren't legal even. And, if you don't do them, then you lose your job. They'll give it to somebody else who will. So it puts you in these ethical dilemmas. And if it wasn't certainly illegal, it was certainly contrary to my ethical code, my own personal values. And so you're kind of forced to make that decision of, what do I do here? Do I play out this role that I've assumed, or do I go with who I truly am? And I'd spent a number of years in my career firing high-level executives who also had been faced with those dilemmas in their lives and had begun to make compromises and then ultimately end up either sick or unable to perform their job function. So it's a very common thing in our society. We see that all the time, where people start to compromise their values and who they are as people, and slowly but surely those compromises eat away at our core of who we are.
I'm just fascinated because I wonder at what point, because that point's at a different place for each person.
Yeah.
When you sit up and you say enough is enough, or we just become so desensitized that we don't know that we've reached that point, and we exist in another world, really.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I think that does happen, that desensitization. And for me personally, there was a moment when I was practicing law. I was living in London, and I was responsible for like 22 countries in Europe as a lawyer, and it was really a dream job from a lawyer's perspective, but it wasn't what I was passionate about. And I had no evidence whatsoever for this, but I literally could feel the seeds of cancer forming inside of me. I would not have been surprised had I stayed in it. If 5 years later I would have received a diagnosis, somebody saying to me, you've got cancer. And I just didn't want to die being so out of alignment with who I really truly was. So and at the same time, I'd finished writing a book, and I had an opportunity to speak at a large Mind, Body, Spirit conference in London that's held there every summer. And that experience was so positively overwhelming the opposite direction. It was enough. I came back from that week's vacation, put in my notice that I was leaving, and just made the decision to go for it. So
it's not easy to make the decision. I don't know what it was like for you. I mean, you're saying it was quite clear, having experienced the euphoria that weekend. But again, just going back to people when they realize that they are bitterly unhappy with their current situation, and yet they'll continue. Where does the strength come from to make the decision and say no more? I'm changing direction.
I don't know. I guess for me it was just I didn't want to die being that person. And
the fear of the unknown.
I was
working at a law firm, making all of this money, having everything at your fingertips, and knowing that you're walking away from that. And
yeah, you sound like a lot of the law partners that I used to talk to, or the executives in the company, who are being like, "Are you crazy? How can you walk away from all of this?" But look, I think it's important that people really connect with who they are and connect with what is inside of them. And I ultimately believe that if I applied the same skill sets that I had applied in becoming a lawyer, the diligence of studying and the discipline and the rigor of trying to create that success, to something that I truly loved. Although I knew it would take some time to do that, I believed in myself. I believed in that potential. And of course, it's what I was writing about and speaking about too, is telling people, look, it's largely an issue of trust, and a lot of times we don't trust. But if you do, and you're willing to align your actions in accordance with that passion of what's being inside of you, then I think life rewards us. And certainly in my case, that's proven to be true.
Well, it was in 2000 you made the radical change.
Yes.
You turned your back on law.
Yes.
And you walked towards a new career of helping people with the leadership and training. So let's take a break. And after the break, let's discuss that, how you entered this world and how people were responding when you first started.
Sounds great.
Hi, my name is S.V. Prinsloo, and I'm the HOD of IT Integration at Bridwin Preparatory School in Melrose. We started using study apps about 6 months ago and have seen astonishing results. We were quite amazed to see how quickly the kids have been able to use study apps and the benefits it has shown with regards to reinforcing what they've already learned inside the classroom. I would highly recommend study apps for any school.
Studyapps.co.za. Welcome back. You're listening to Niki Seberini. This is Conversations with Niki. I have Austin Vickers in the studio. And Austin is in South Africa at the moment. He's promoting his movie, People versus the State of Illusion, a movie that he wrote and has produced. Austin's been sharing his story of being a lawyer in the States and in London, high-flying, earning the big money. I'm so sure so many people are listening going, that's what I want to be. But he walked away from it, and he decided to become a leadership trainer. So, Austin, that's really where we're picking up, is walking away from the law, starting to train. What made you realize that you would be able to resonate, to connect, to help others?
Well, I think, if you think about one of the skill sets of a lawyer is they learn the ability to take a very complex subject. I started my career as a trial lawyer, and often when you're dealing with complex business litigation that you then have to present to a jury, you learn that skill set of taking a complex subject and learning to translate it into a language that a layperson can really truly understand and make a decision that you want them to make regarding the subject matter. So I knew that, and at the same time I was reading a lot of material, deep material in psychology and philosophy and consciousness studies and quantum physics, and a lot in the intersection where all of those subjects kind of combine and come together. And I was fascinated by the material and the suggestion from that material of the way we perceive, the importance of imagination, etc. And I knew that I could really translate those subjects into a language and into metaphors that would help people to truly understand it. And once they did understand it, it would have a dramatic impact on their lives. And that's certainly proven to be true in my lifetime. Yeah.
So what made you take it to the next level, a movie?
Well, I was doing a lot of speaking and training in the United States for corporations. I typically work with big companies, helping them with the process of imagination and how to, build processes. When I go around and speak to a lot of companies, one of the things I ask them is, of course, they have limited amounts of time and limited amounts of money and limited amounts of resources. Imagination is one of the few things that is available in unlimited supply, and it's a renewable resource. And yet companies have processes in place for money and, of course, and with finance, and they have processes in place for people with HR, and they have processes in place for time. But I'll speak to a business audience and ask them, how many of you have a process in place for nurturing and cultivating imagination? And no hands ever go up. So I knew there was this huge potential for it. And it was, once you can teach people, individuals or organizations, how to develop and cultivate that imagination, it's really, it significantly alters the success that they're able to create. And it's becoming increasingly more important. And that's what I was teaching. And my universe was kind of limited to corporations. And I was speaking for a television station in the United States called PBS, which is Public Broadcast System. And I had an idea for the film at that time. I presented it to them, and they liked the idea and said if I went and made it, they would put it on air, assuming the quality was good. And that was kind of all the incentive I needed. It was an imagination I'd held myself, and was a dream I wanted to bring into reality. And so I went about to make it.
And here we are.
Talking
about the movie.
Yes, in South Africa.
But I want to go back to this imagination. I mean, when I think of imagination, I think in terms of children growing up and using their imaginations. And, as parents and as teachers, what can we do to enhance the imagination? But it's almost as if we reach a certain stage of our lives when we leave imagination behind, because imagination is play, isn't it? And we've got to get really serious, and we've got to get down to proper living and being adults, and imagination doesn't form a part of that at all.
I think you're exactly right. I think as parents and adults, we actually kill imagination in children because
we move away from it.
Yeah, we definitely do. And certainly within companies and within organizations, some of the structures that allow those organizations to survive are the very things that actually kill imagination, like conformity, for example. Conformity is terrible for imagination because it makes us fall within a very narrowly defined limitation that's prescribed to us by somebody else. And we do that to children. We don't think children should, stand out, so we conform them to fit in and not draw undue attention to themselves. And we do the same thing with business executives within companies. And that's okay, because a certain amount of conformity and structure, of course, is necessary. But what I think then it requires, both on an individual and organizational basis, is that we develop processes for imagination that allow us at certain times and certain moments to step outside of that structure, to step outside of that conformity, and get to a place of play in the mind where it can really, open up. So
how did you take that concept and turn it into a movie?
Well, I went out and interviewed some of the world's leading experts in the fields of neuroscience, in psychology, in physics, in some of the areas that I had studied, and filmed them. I got to spend 3 to 4 hours with each one of them, really pulling out some of the science that supports the propositions that I set forth in the film. And then I wanted to put it into a metaphor that people could understand. So I wrote a narrative script about and told a story about a guy who ends up in prison, because I think that idea, the metaphor of somebody, being caught in these prison walls, is very applicable to what happens to us as we sometimes grow up and our imagination dies because we're kind of trapped and confined. And at the forefront of emotional intelligence and self-awareness, of course, the good news is if we've constructed those prison walls, then we can also deconstruct them. We just have to learn how. And that's what I had been teaching for so long, and it's what I try to present in the film, is to let people know, look, these are the things that you're actually perceiving and imagining, and they're creating these prison walls that then result in things like relationships that fail and job, careers that fail, and people getting sick and suffering from disease. But it doesn't have to be that way. There's a way to escape that if you're willing to learn and do the work.
So the how we're going to get to in a moment, it goes back to you when I asked you the question, how did you come to the decision that you were no longer going to practice as a lawyer, you were no longer going to be the person you did not want to be? So what are they? Are they the telltale signs? I mean, you spoke about cancer, you spoke about being ill. If we have these walls that we have built up that we're not even aware of, how do we know that we're bitterly unhappy and that we are jailed, that we are imprisoned in our own walls?
Well, that was one of the purposes of the movie, is to really show, how the prison walls are actually formed from a scientific standpoint. For example, one of the things we talk about is that science today tells us that we receive billions of bits of information on a daily basis, literally. And yet what rises to the level of our awareness, are typically anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 thoughts in a day. Well, if you look at that mathematically, what that tells us is that in terms of our view of reality, what we're even capable of perceiving is less than 1/1000th of 1% of the total information that's presented to us. So how could I possibly have even the slightest objective view of reality when the percentage of reality that I can ever even consciously process is that small? And so what that tells us is that whatever it is I'm seeing, of course, is largely just an imagination, and it's more reflective of who I am as an individual than what's out there in the world. Now, that's a sobering thought for a lot of people the first time they hear it, but the good news is that if that's true, which of course I believe it is, and it's scientifically supported, what it also then tells us is that we can escape it, because I can put on a different pair of glasses to see the world. And once I shift that perception, then the world around me dramatically shifts. A lot of people experience this anyway, they just don't realize it. For example, young mothers when they first have a child, or a new dog owner who first gets his very first dog. They'll often comment about how many, all of a sudden baby commercials they start seeing on television, or they start noticing other mothers with children around. Or the dog owner will notice how many other similar dogs of their breed are all of a sudden in their neighborhood. Well, the neighborhood didn't change, and the commercials on TV didn't change. They were always there. It's just that the person didn't see them because their focus of awareness wasn't fixated on those things. And that's how we can change that world around us. And so that's what I really wanted to kind of bring an understanding to people and organizations, is that, look, you don't have to wait until crisis. I mean, I think when we're young, in our 20s and even sometimes into our 30s, the world is so exciting. You know, we get our first, new boyfriend or girlfriend, our first new job, and it's all very exciting. But after 10, 20 years, when the failures continue to creep in, and we've changed relationships numerous times, we've changed jobs numerous times, and the same problems seem to be showing up all the time, then we have to stop and look and go, well, geez, there's a common denominator here. Who's that common denominator? It's me. And if I don't change, it's the old Einstein quote, repeating the same behavior and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. And of course, that's true. We're not going to be able to affect the change until we start to think differently than the way we've thought to create the problems in the first place.
And if you have just tuned in, good afternoon to you. I'm Niki Seberini. You're listening to Conversations with Niki. I have Austin Vickers in the studio. Austin is here promoting his movie, The People versus the State of Illusion, which he wrote and produced. He's also a leadership trainer, public speaker, and author. So, Austin, we're talking about, and just to give you just a brief, my understanding of the movie, which is great. You have this Aaron Roberts who finds himself in jail. He's a single parent. He's about to lose his job. He's dealing with, I think, the stress that many, many people can relate to. And he finds himself in prison. And there was one particular scene which stood out for me when a janitor walks past his jail cell and says to him, what's happening? He was quite rude. And then he says, well, my life was hell before, and my life's hell now, and this is what's happened to me. And it's very sad. And the janitor says, well, it seems, and this is exactly what you were saying just before the break, that the common denominator between this hell and that hell is you. And I must say, that got me thinking. So the question that I have to ask you is, how do we make a change?
Well, I think that's one of the things we set forth in the film, is we have to become aware of the patterns of our thinking. We call it in psychology a content to process shift, which means that we stop focusing on the content or the story of our experience, and we start to focus on the process of our thinking or the patterns of our thinking. And when those patterns are unimaginative or negative or critical or judgmental, then we have to interrupt that process and ask ourselves a series of questions, which is, is this view of reality that I have, is the perception I have, does it inspire me? Does it make me feel passionate? Do I wake up in the morning and I can't wait to start the day because it's so exciting for me? And if we can't answer yes to that question, and of course, many, many people can't, then we have to begin to ask ourselves, okay, what is a different way I can look at this world? What is a different way that I can see it that would allow me to feel passionate and allow me to be inspired by my life and allow me to wake up every single day and with an enthusiasm and a zest for life that's, contagious? Because once it becomes contagious, then of course the world starts responding to us as well, and we can, really have miraculous things happening in our life.
But we have to pay bills. We have to put our kids through school. We've got responsibilities. We can't live in a world of passion and desire and living out our dreams, because is that the reality?
Yes, because of course we don't deserve all of that greatness. We must struggle. We must struggle and fight and only live in pain because, it's true. I think a lot of people...
Is it a balance?
I think a lot of people feel that... they feel, there's a line in the film where Thomas More, one of the experts in the film, says, people aren't afraid of dying, they're really afraid of living. They're afraid of what it would take to actually live and follow who and what they are, because there are prices to be paid for that. I mean, people will reject us, people won't necessarily approve of the direction that we take. But the price we pay by not following our heart and not following our passion, of course, is a pretty steep price to pay, because we pay it in the terms of the failure of relationships and the failure physically by the diseases that we create. I mean, one of the facts we report in the film is the American Psychological Association in the United States went back and reviewed the death records of everyone who died in America for over 100 years, and determined that over 50% of the deaths in the United States could be attributed to behavioral social factors, the majority of which were rooted in stress. Now, if you think about that, that's like 1 out of 2 people will die because they don't address the issues that create stress in their life. Or they try to address it from an external standpoint, which is changing the external world, which, of course, we're not very good at, and we don't have much control over that. But we do have control over the way that we view it, and that's what the film's trying to show.
Okay, so it's perceptions.
Sure.
Okay, so you said, for the person who's got the first-time puppy, all of a sudden they see ads for dog food, and they're walking down the street and they're seeing how many people have also got puppies. So do we live our lives the same way, but just change the way we see our lives? Is that changing perception?
I think so. I mean, sometimes it will mean a change. Sometimes it means we don't change. But I think what we have to do first is take accountability and responsibility for our lives, recognizing that we are the ones that are seeing it in a particular way. And however it is that we're seeing it, we're responsible for. And then secondly, we have to be much better at imagination. I mean, to cite your example, you said, well, we have to pay bills and we have to, do all of these kind of chores of life. But who says that we can't do both at the same time? I think when people feel like they can't do both, following their heart and their passion and still paying bills, it's because there's a lack of imagination going on. They haven't spent the time to really develop their imaginations to the point where they've figured out how to make that work. And that's what we see with people like the Steve Jobs of the world, who refuse to, live a life that is just paying bills, and said, no, I'm going to pursue my passion regardless. And I mean, he went from, he's a great story and a great example because he built Apple computers and then was kicked out of his own company and essentially lost all of his wealth and had to recreate it from scratch. But again, the one thing that I'm sure he knew intrinsically was that imagination is an unlimited supply. It's a renewable resource. And if you take accountability for that and are willing to learn how to cultivate an imaginative mind, then it doesn't matter. You can recreate from scratch and really create a world, beyond your wildest dreams.
I think Steve Jobs was definitely an embodiment of taking the imagination and having absolutely no limits. But if we're going to talk about Steve Jobs, I mean, you just cited the statistics of how many people in America have died due to stress. I mean, this is a man who we watched waste away, literally. I mean, he fought for many, many years against this cancer that he had. And to see such a brilliance go before our very eyes was terribly sad. It was a huge loss for the world, for humanity, really. But he was living his dreams. His imagination was in full swing. I don't know what his stress levels were like, and yet this is a man who still died from a disease which could have been related to stress or unfulfilled dreams or whatever it is.
Well, I think in the case of Steve Jobs in particular, I mean, we've even seen with Apple, whenever Steve Jobs isn't involved in Apple, the company seems to go down. And certainly on the negative side of Steve Jobs, what was reported in his book was that he was a nightmare in terms of relationships. And so as imaginative as he may have been technologically, what I would say is he wasn't very imaginative when it came to relationships or emotionally. And of course, what we know is that there's a very strong and direct link between emotional programming and emotional intelligence and disease. And so, I think in his case in particular, perhaps that was an area that could have been cultivated a little more and developed a little bit more. But I'm not sure that would have still staved off the cancer that he died from. I mean, it's my own personal view that there is randomness in the universe. We see it happen all the time. But what we're always
we don't know why.
What we're always in control of course, is our response to that randomness. And so,
Going back to the movie, this Aaron Roberts, this father, who finds himself in jail, and he really feels that he's been hard done by because he had a couple of drinks, and unfortunately there was this accident, and he did kill someone, and so he landed up in jail. So there's this epiphany that takes place. He is able to change, and he is able to see. Do you think that people watching the movies will be able to relate to Aaron Roberts? Do you think the relationships that he has, and do you think that they will be able also to follow a similar journey? And is that what you want for your viewers?
I definitely think people will be able to relate to it because, of course, it's not so much the fact that he killed somebody, but it was just, he was out having a few drinks and happened to get in an accident and of course, caused the death. And it's that, sometimes people feel like, oh, yeah, I'm not a bad person. I don't intentionally do things, which, of course, Aaron says as well in the film. And I think that's the point. It's when we're not conscious, when we're not aware, and fully taking responsibility for our lives and the results in those lives, that then problems can arise and things can happen. And so certainly one of the points of the film is that as it relates to imagination and as it relates to our results in life, we have to become much more conscious of it. And when we do, and if we do, then we can begin to have dramatic impact upon people's lives. And the film, I think, does go and speak to exactly how you can do that, how to shift imagination, to going to the deeper psychological processes that are at play. Although it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, one of the things that we talk about is that developing the habits of imagination, developing the habits of self-awareness and emotional intelligence are like, it's the equivalent to learning how to play the violin or master a golf swing. The epiphany of our need to make that change can happen overnight, but to actually develop the skill set, of course, like anything, takes a long period of time, and that's why even in the film you see the transformation of Aaron take place over a 2 to 3 year period of time.
So, Austin, what should people be doing? Should they be taking time out of their busy day? Should they be meditating? Should they be trying to get their imagination expanding? What do you recommend?
Well, the first thing I would recommend, and I'll be a little self-serving here, of course, is just to educate themselves a little bit about the mechanics of perception and imagination and emotional intelligence and self-awareness. So, of course, I would tell them just watch the film, first of all, That's why I made the film, was to really open people's eyes to what is possible and how this stuff actually works. And then continue the education process. I mean, that's, of course, in any genre, in any culture, in any society, we know that people who are educated make better choices. And so if people will educate themselves around issues like self-awareness and leadership, then, of course, they're going to improve dramatically the outcomes in their lives. And we talk throughout the film. I don't want to, give it all away while we're speaking today, but if people will watch the film, we do talk about, okay, how can you shift and what should you shift in order to be able to make that kind of an impact on your external world. And we give lots of examples of that in the film. And then, of course, they can follow up with that, by going to the film's website. One of the things that I recommend, we have coaches here in South Africa. One of the sponsors of me coming in here is a woman by the name of Savannah Steinberg. People can go to her website, savannahsteinberg.com. And these are people who have taken the time to study those pathways and how to resolve those kinds of emotional issues and develop that imagination and emotional intelligence so that they can begin to make changes in their lives. And as long as they do that, then there's a lot of hope for people. They can really, really make dramatic impacts.
Well, what I was going to say as well is we're dealing with so many issues, aren't we? I mean, from birth, our childhood, the experiences that we have, the disappointments, the celebrations, everything, they all impact on the person that we are today. So taking time and working on the imagination is great, but I'm sure that there are triggers that we have. So things can happen in our lives, and then we respond in a certain way, and maybe we like to think that we've dealt with the way we respond, but it's there. So we need to go to professionals, and I sometimes feel that it's so much easier if we want to look a certain way to go to a stylist or to go to a personal trainer or, cut out the carbs. It's so much easier. But when we're working on self, it's so much more painful. And I think very few of us realize how important it is to go to the right person.
Yes.
You know, and I think we almost need a shift. There almost needs a switch that needs to turn for people to realize that.
Yeah, there's no question, but the value of those people is that they will start to develop processes within us that help to develop the qualities of imagination that, dramatically change our lives. And of course, even here in South Africa, you guys have such a great example in your former president, Nelson Mandela. I mean, here was a guy who spent almost a lifetime in prison and had the ability to choose a myriad of different reactions to that experience, but chose a reaction that inspired a country and inspired the world. I mean, every child, every person pretty much around the world knows who Nelson Mandela is and what he was able to accomplish, because that's a perfect example. His imaginations were above kind of the typical response that you might expect from somebody who has been slighted or hurt or damaged in the ways that he certainly was. And that's really the point of this film, is to say, like Nelson Mandela, we all have prison walls that confine us. We all have prison walls, not nearly as harsh as his were, thank goodness, but we create emotional prison walls. And our response to those prison walls and how we ultimately escape from them is an adventure. It can be a very inspiring adventure as well, for us individually. And when we embark on that adventure, then we can also inspire the lives of other people. And I think that's why he set such a great example for the world and for us as individuals, because we can take that same journey that he took. And in our own unique way, and
I think journey being the operative word is it's a process, and it doesn't happen overnight.
No.
The amount of time he spent in jail gave him that opportunity, I suppose, being separated, because that opportunity some person could have used to just allow the anger and the bitterness to simmer.
Yes.
And for him, he used it in a completely different way. And as you say, that's why he's such an example. So let me ask you about your journey. You spoke about you growing up with these wonderful hippie parents sending you off with whole wheat bread sandwiches and sprouts while everyone was having burgers.
I know, those were the worst sandwiches. Yes.
And of course, law, and then going out and helping people, and now this book. But you're learning from people all the time, and you're growing. How has your journey, how are you feeling at this point in your life?
Every day for me is just such a thrill. I can honestly say, here I am. I'm in South Africa and touching people's lives in ways that I would never have imagined 10 years ago. And that's the beauty of imagination. We have our own ideas about how we want to affect the world or how we want to bring our dreams into reality. And what I have found in my experience is that when we find the courage to follow those dreams and we trust the process long enough to really start to turn our imaginations into reality, then life responds in ways that we could never have imagined, and in ways often much larger and much bigger than the ways that we imagined in the first place. And that makes, the journey so much more exciting. It really truly becomes, there's a Sanskrit word I love, which is called Leela, and what it means is the divine play. And to cite back to your example, I feel like a 5-year-old boy in the world again. That's, it's so exciting. And I wake up very passionate about the experiences that I get to have. And just this week, I was on a safari here in South Africa and got to see animals. And it was such an amazing experience that, for me occurred because I was at one point in time, and even today, I'm willing to follow my dreams and imagination. So I certainly recommend it for everybody.
Well, Austin, thank you so much for coming into the studio, for sharing your thoughts, your ideas with us. And for people who want to get their hands on your movie, where can they get hold of it?
The easiest way to get it here in South Africa is just to go to the website www.savannahsteinberg.com, and they'll have access for the information there as well. And if not, they can also go to the movie's website, which is www.thestateofillusion.com, and Savannah's contact information will be on our website as well, so that they can get access to the film here in South Africa.
So be prepared to be challenged, change your reality, your perceptions, and that's what it's all about. Austin, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on, Niki.
Hi, my name is Vickers Philippa Levitt, and I'm the HOD of IT Integration at Bridwin Preparatory School in Melrose. We started using study apps about 6 months ago and have seen astonishing results. We were quite amazed to see how quickly the kids have been able to use study apps and the benefits it has shown with regards to reinforcing what they've already learned inside the classroom. I would highly recommend study apps for any school.
Studyapps.co.za. So that was my very interesting discussion with Austin Vickers just a few weeks ago. And as I said, I have Philippa Levitt in the studio. And Philippa is an integrative coach. She's been on the show before. And Philippa, in fact, brought Austin Vickers to South Africa. And so, Philippa, welcome. Lovely to have you on the show once again.
Thank you, Niki, and thanks for having me.
Listen, Austin's a lovely man.
Isn't he?
But what the interesting story is how he was brought up, how he moved away from that and he studied law, and he wasn't living within in his integrity, as you said, and then he moved back to what he knew best, and it was following that passion. Now, you've had a similar situation as well. I mean, you're a lawyer, you've practiced as a lawyer, you've had your own firm, and yet you made a decision to follow a passion. I'm not quite sure what the passion was. I know it's art and it's the coaching, but how you found that passion. So perhaps you can just tell us, I mean, listening to Austin, knowing Austin and your story as well, how does that happen in terms of passion? Is it something that you wake up and you go, oh, that's my passion? Do you have to meditate over your passion? Do you have to think deeply, or is it just something that is part of your pulse and your beat and who you are?
Absolutely. What happens is that you feel the sense of something that is pulling you, and you actually don't necessarily know what it is. You just know that there's something else. And ultimately, that is what a passion is. It's following your heart if you are able to. And I think perhaps we can discuss ways in which you don't have to give up your job. I mean, that's just foolhardy. And it's not true that just because you're doing your passion, the money is going to follow. Not necessarily. So you've got to do it in such a way that you begin to listen to the callings of your heart and what that means and how it plays itself out in your life. And there's one other point that I want to make that I think is really important, is that if there's some big thing that you've overcome in your life, something that you have gone through that has been incredibly difficult that you have overcome, very often your calling, when you talk about your calling or your work, would be to help other people who are going through the same thing, to stand where you're standing and look back and say, look, this is the path, this is the route, this is what you can do, and to inspire them, to show them that there is in fact a light at the end of that tunnel. So if you talk about calling and how you find it, the one way is to go with your emotions. The other is to look at what is it that I have overcome in my life. And then another thing is, what is it that I'm really angry about that needs to be changed in society or around me? And therein too lies a possibility of a calling. And that's really, you almost work backwards from what it is and look at those issues and what is it that I really get angry about or I really get passionate about, and what can I do? How can I contribute?
Well, what I find interesting is asking the question. I'm just wondering how many people ask themselves these type of questions. We just seem to be going, doing, taking action, performing, and it's all outward. It's all happening. And I just feel that there's very little time to go within because we're just doing the normal things every single day. And the question is this something that is nurtured from childhood? Can you teach your children to think more inwardly about life, about the mastering oneself, mind, achievements? Is it, if you haven't had that opportunity, if it wasn't encouraged while you were growing up, how can you possibly go within and start to connect with that person and ask those questions?
Well, you can't, and you can't expect somebody else just to be there and do it. Each person is on their own. I know it's a cliche, but everyone is on their own journey, and everybody has to discover it in their own way. And if you are requiring that other people see things in the way that you see things, that's absolutely, you're going to be disappointed, and it's absolutely not fair. So, and especially with children, You can inspire them, you can show them something, but you can't require that they do it. And likewise with a spouse. I mean, one side might decide to awaken and want to understand on a deeper level, and the other might not. And the truth of the matter is that I believe, when you talk about mastery, I believe that we are all on some kind of a journey towards mastery, but that there are so many different ways to do it. I think had I stayed in law, I would have mastered certain things along the way just by being in the process, of living. We are all on that journey. And when you get to a point where you're feeling discontent and stuck, that is very much the point at which you might say, okay, well, maybe I need to begin to seek answers. And one of the things that Debbie Ford once said, and it just resonated so deeply with me, is that discontent is the tap on your shoulder that you're ready for the next level of your evolution. So when you're feeling unhappy with what is going on, what can you do is perhaps the question you're asking, without actually just giving it all up. I mean, you can't. We've got to live in this world. But what's happening in this world, what has happened in this world, it's almost like it's calling on us to go deeper and to find solutions to problems. Because what we've done up until now, on a massive scale, so much hasn't worked. We've still got wars. We've got immense poverty. So the way in which we have constructed the world it leaves an enormous amount, there's enormous potential for growth and for change. And what is being said, I guess, in the transformational movement is that change is a change that we need to begin to look on. It's an inner change that needs to take place. So we may have mastered technology and communication, and we've been to the moon, and we are just amazing. Our medicine is absolutely magnificent. That's the work of the intellect, of the mind. And what I'm saying is that perhaps what we need to do is to begin to develop the heart more. And what's so nice, wonderful about that is that you don't have to be brilliant to do it. You don't have to be learned to do it. You don't have to stop your day to do it. It's really just about becoming more aware of where you are emotionally, and really beginning to see your emotions as a doorway to your soul, and as a red flag telling you that there's somewhere where you need to look. And perhaps if you're in a job where you just are so incredibly unhappy, really, instead of running away from that and just going through the motions and beating yourself down, I mean, it's really asking on you to see, okay, what is this? How can I look at it? How can I look at it in a new way? What is it that I need to do? Do I need to leave? And what are the steps that I need to take to create something new and to begin to do something new?
So it's going from being unconscious to being conscious. And I get that. But I'm just wondering, I mean, I started off the show talking about the economy. This is a reality. Talking about unemployment in South Africa and around the world. This is the reality. So there are people who are just trying to get through from day to day. And there are those people who are fortunate enough who don't have to worry about that. And I just wonder, in that busy day, with the stresses and the worries, where they have the pause and the moment to be conscious and connect with that. The questions, the thoughts.
Yes, I mean, that's really a good question.
I mean, I keep going back to that. I just, we're talking about this movement, and we're talking about being aware of the bigger issues. But I think it's more challenging now than it's ever been. We are distracted. We're continuously distracted. Think about the technology that we have. There's very little eye-to-eye contact, interpersonal communication. We're communicating through our smartphones, through our iPads. Everything's changing, besides, as I said, compounding the economy. And so it on one side, we're being pulled in one direction to just exist and survive, and very quickly. And yet there's this pull for the conscious living, a balance. For people who are listening and really want to be able to take that step.
Absolutely. If it is important enough, if the pain of being stuck in the situation that you're in is enough, that is when you will say, okay, it's important enough for me to set aside that time to do what I need to do. Now, what would that look like? perhaps it's just as simple as going and getting a book. Just going in and buying an inspiring book. How much of your time does that take? Read it at night when you go to bed. Read something that will give you a sense of, gee, wow, that's a possibility. As I said, you don't have to give everything up. If perhaps it's joining a meditation class and beginning to access a deeper part of yourself. You literally need to learn how to do it, and then you can do it on your own. If it's important enough, I really believe that we will find the time. It's there for us, and the fact that our lives are so frenetic and crazy, it's really you're kind of losing your connection to yourself. And when you find that connection to yourself, the interesting thing is that all the other stuff flows so much better. So it looks like you're taking time out from your day. I mean, I'm the most time urgent person I think I've ever met. I always feel like, have to do. But actually, when you stop, then you become clear and you work on raising your consciousness, then you can be in your life in a so much more empowered way, where you say, okay, well, hold on, what is it that's important? What is it that I need to do, and what is it that I don't need to do? Let me just think about it. Do I have to answer every single email as it arrives, or can I set aside an hour or half an hour at the end of every day to or whatever it is? As soon as you become more conscious, you can take your power back from what it is that you're talking about, and this frenetic, crazy life that we all live. And so, I guess that is what I would say. And I mean, if anybody would like to have an idea of what sort of books would be interesting to read, with pleasure, they can email me, or they can go to their local bookstore and find it. And it's not such a big commitment. That would be what I would say. And, perhaps it does speak about the ladder of skills a little bit, because when we speak about, Abraham, the first time I heard about it, this is what inspires me, and this is what really gets me excited, is that I heard Wayne Dyer. I just came across this tape really early into my journey where he spoke about Abraham Maslow and the ladder of skills, and he spoke about how at the very bottom of the ladder we have panic, and that is where you have people in mental institutions who have no control over their life, or what life gives to them, how they're going to actually respond to it. Then up from there's inertia, where you're depressed, you're overwhelmed, you're beaten down. Up from there's striving, where you are always trying to get someplace. It's like, I'll be happy when this happens, when that happens. And then there's coping, where you just get along with things, you don't think about, you never really think about much, and you just go through the motions of your life. And then he spoke about this concept of mastery, and mastery is the moment at which, or the understanding that you actually can begin to influence your outer world by working on your inner world. You can begin to master your emotions and your feelings and your thoughts. You don't have to think those negative thoughts just because your parents said it or everyone around you. You can begin to make your way through and begin to see things in a new way. So really, for me, that doesn't mean that you have to give your whole life up. You can do it, because when you're in panic, you're not happy. When you're in inertia, you're definitely not doing anything. And so this is really an opportunity. It's like, as I said earlier, taking your power back from the world and doing it bit by bit in a way that, what I would say to your listeners is to do it in a way that is not overwhelming. It is not just going to add to what you've got, but to do it in a way that you can, little bit by little bit. And for me, what happened was I was drawn in bit by bit, and then there would be times when I had enough. I didn't want to know anymore, and I just went back into my life. But it kind of has a way of pulling you in, and when you open yourself up to that, what happens is that all the people appear in the most amazing way, and suddenly you meet somebody, or you hear a tape or something, and then you're back in it again. So just trust it. Trust that the journey will take you in at its own pace, and that everybody has their own pace.
It's not quitting your job and saying, this is not my dream and my calling. I'm giving it all up and I'm taking the plunge. It's a journey. It's a slow journey.
and you've got to take it in at the rate that it suits you.
Philippa, thank you. Thank you so much. We have unfortunately run out of time. And I hope that you've benefited from that. And I hope that you're going to go and watch the movie and you're going to question perceptions and reality. And I'd love to hear from you. Any feedback, you can email me, Niki@NikiSeberini.com. And please do go to the website Conversations with Niki, spelled Niki, and you can get the podcast for the show. Until next week, have a great one. Goodbye. Conversations with Niki was brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets.